Hello, everybody. Today we've got a webinar on online digital hints and tips. We hope it's going to be a really interesting, discursive one and interactive. So the way it's going to run is that I think Judy is going to kick off with a section on clients, with Simon chipping in as he will. Oh, sorry, I'll introduce you all. Simon is in the middle at the moment, followed by Lauren, and Judy's still up top. Yes, so Judy kicks off, and Lauren will then do tips on how to make the process smoother. Judy will go back to the process and stimulus, and then Simon will come in at the end. So would you like to kick off, Judy?
Yes, hi everybody. Anybody who knows me will think this is extraordinary that I'm on a webinar talking to people about how to run online groups, because it's not something I grew up with, but because needs must, and I've spent quite a lot of time over the last few years helping with online communities and online groups, and lots of individual interviews using this technology. I think I've learned a few things along the way, usually by trial and error, and one of the things that I thought we could kick off with is just talking a bit about managing clients in this process. If clients have used online technology a lot before to get in touch with the consumer, they're usually pretty confident about it. But there are some clients who have always been very keen on face-to-face interaction with consumers, and they're the ones who are quite nervous. They're nervous about the quality of the data they're going to get out, how people are going to feel, how the platform's going to work, and how they play their part or not. So what we've learned, I think, or I certainly have over the last few weeks, is that if you practice with them, show them the platform, talk about how it works, explain if there are breakout rooms, how breakout rooms work, and also explain to them the difference in the interview process rather than the similarities. I think we spend a lot of time saying, oh, it's just as good as face-to-face. Actually, it's different. And if clients expect that difference, so they understand when consumers will be able to talk, how you manage the process, exhaustion levels, etc., that seems to be really useful and give them a lot of confidence. The other thing that we've been doing a lot of here is letting them be part of the process, maybe not visible, it's up to them, but being very explicit and transparent with your consumers up front that you've got a client or you've got a colleague who's also working with you on the project who's part of listening into this, and that they might have some really interesting questions. And actually, in many cases, they've come on screen at the end and they've talked to the consumers, and it's quite an intimate environment, funnily enough, even though it's virtual. And it seems as though the clients feel very privileged to have that sort of access to those consumers that they've listened to for an hour or however long. And it worked really well, and it feels like a much more honest process in some ways. The integrity is there, which isn't there maybe when you have a two-way mirror. So that was my my thoughts on the client, and also explaining to them very clearly how you're going to expose stimulus, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. So,
okay.
Hi everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit about making the process as smooth as it possibly can be. It's as much in the planning as anything else, and the devil is always in the details, and no is always the case with qualitative research, but if you can believe it, it's probably even more so with online research. So just thinking about the sort of prep that's involved, particularly with participants at the start, just don't fall at the first hurdle, I guess, would be my advice. So it's all around, you know, sending out really clear joining instructions for participants, just things like making sure that they've got the room prepared in a way that's going to give them space to actually talk to you, and they're not going to get interrupted. You know, they're comfortable and they feel that they can talk and be honest and open. Another little thing that we found as we've started doing a lot of online research is even just simple things like checking email addresses before start actually doing the research, because you'd be amazed how many times you get, you know, just little letters or symbols wrong, and then you get bounced back. So there are ways you can sort of get around that by just testing links and sending emails before the session.
Can I stop
that's
you just
something
for a
that
moment, Lauren, because I've had 2 people come in saying they can't actually see it. Well, not, they're using the link, and I don't know whether they're using the link, the first link that was sent out, or the second. Can people possibly chat with us just to say that they're out there? Because if not, we've got a problem.
I've got, shows 65 participants on the...
There's people all over the place saying they're here.
Yes, now I see it too. I'm really sorry for the people who aren't. I am here, I am here. Oh, thank you. Right, I'll get back to the ones who aren't. Sorry, Lauren.
I was just going to pick up on that point, Lauren, because that's something that's cropped up, hasn't it? And I know that we work with our recruiters to change our process for recruitment, specifically for online focus groups, to build in that, I suppose, the verification of email address to get people to log on 24 hours beforehand, and to go through that extra layer of checking, just so that when you're at 2 minutes before start time, you're not nervously sweating, thinking, oh gosh, I'm being victim by my client, I'm not sure if anybody's going to turn up. So that's worked for us, hasn't it?
Yeah, it just makes you the stress levels go down quite a lot if you just do all that prep beforehand. And the other thing, just touching on that point, Simon, about giving yourself some time at the start is also really beneficial. So we always say in our joining instructions to participants to join 10 minutes early, just so we can make sure that they're there, as you kind of would do, I guess, if you were doing a face-to-face group. It's just that they would be in the waiting room rather than on screen. And we also just say, just to avoid any awkwardness, if they can just turn their mic and their camera off, so everyone's there, but they're not sort of all awkwardly sat there, not necessarily wanting to talk to each other at the start, which again is kind of what happens in focus groups. Half of the time they talk to each other, sometimes they don't. You know, so it just kind of means that everyone starts on a bit of a level playing field, really. And the other thing is just to, in the joining instructions, just make sure that they're all aware that their equipment works. So again, really obvious thing to say, but, you know, batteries can go dead, you know, they can be facing, I don't know if anyone's ever done it, but they've got the camera facing a window and then you can't see the person.
I think that's exceptional.
You know, checking their internet strength, that they're sort of sat at a table maybe rather than on a sofa. I think quite often people underestimate how difficult it is to hold a phone for an hour and a half or however long the session is going to be. So just making sure that, you know, that they're sort of prepared as they can be as well. And then just thinking about the stuff that you might need to do as well. It's just about making sure that you're prepared. So as with technology, as we've kind of just seen with Luella's example there, it's just making sure that you sort of test and retest things. So have a lot of internal run-throughs. You can have run-throughs with the client as well, as Judy sort of alluded to at the start as well, just to make sure that everyone's comfortable. Particularly if you're sharing screens or sharing audio, it can be a little bit confusing as to which screen you're actually showing. So it's just making sure that you're sharing the right screen and only one screen rather than your desktop or something else in the background that you might not want people to see. And the other,
I was just going to say, I've been doing some work with the medical fraternity, and it's quite interesting trying to talk to people in their homes and wanting to understand their background. I was just looking at, I don't mean their social background, I mean their physical, environmental background. If you look at me and Luella, you can see much more of what's going on behind us. You can make a guess at where we are. You and Simon are not giving anything away. Sometimes you don't want to give anything away, sometimes you do, and sometimes you want to create an environment which feels a particular way. And one of the things we've also done is encourage, if we're talking about something linked to food, for instance, can we do part of this interview in your kitchen so that we can see the environment you're working in? And that's been really exciting, actually, and probably more exciting than looking at people in a viewing facility. So, you know, there's a lot can be learned from how far back people are and what they have behind them.
Yeah,
it's quite interesting, that observation at its highest there, isn't it, really? So yeah, and then the other thing I was going to mention actually was just about working together as a team. So particularly if you're new to this, doing you know, moderating an online focus group is fine, but there might actually be some things in the background that your team can support with. So one thing that we found is really useful is actually having someone be your sort of host or hostess, as you would have in a normal focus group. So someone from your team that literally is just responsible for calling participants if they're late, you know, so that you can deal with talking to the client or sort of just getting prepared rather than having to sort of worry about actually whether people are going to turn up or whether they've got, you know, the right phone numbers, that sort of thing. So it just means that there's someone in the background that can deal with technical issues, participant issues, and you can just focus on the research, which is, I think, what we'd all like to to focus on.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, I think if somebody's feeling nervous, then having like a co-moderator for the first time you run an online focus group is, you know, same as you would in face-to-face. Really, it can just reassure and make the whole thing just sort of feel a bit more relaxed, doesn't it?
Yeah, and the other thing, just to touch on Judy's point about making sure that your environment is also set up and is sort of showing what you want to show. So don't make it too formal, don't make it too informal either as well. There's a good sort of balance to be struck there, and there's nothing to stop you at the start, you know, particularly in this scenario, if you're doing it in this scenario, just to be really honest and say, you know, this is a bit of an odd situation that we're all in at the minute, and you know, this is kind of like my environment. I'm really interested in seeing your environment. It's all about just getting that rapport as a moderator and getting the level playing field right from the get-go, really.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a bit about learning, building and bonding with the consumers, and then a little bit about stimulus material. And again, these are just things I've come across or learned on the job, and actually I'd be really interested in anybody building on these. But one of the truths about online communication in groups, and we've all done it through speaking to our friends on Zoom calls, personally drives me nuts because nobody seems to know when they want to speak. You've always got a dominant aunt or somebody who wants to hold the floor, and in fact, quizzes have become so popular, I think, because there's some discipline and structure around how people respond to each other. So it's interactive, but it's controlled interaction. And I guess that's the clue to what I'm going to say here, which is give people some turns and use their names even more than you might do in groups, because it encourages those quieter responders. But there are quite a lot of tricks you can use to connect consumers with each other. If you don't want to use breakout rooms because it's complicated or you don't have time or you're not sure how that works, you can play pass it on games. So, you know, I could think of a word and to describe something, and I could say, I'm handing the next word on to Lauren, and then Lauren can hand it on to Luella, and so on. And it's quite a nice way of making sure every single person who's in your session is getting an opportunity to have their say. You can also direct the quieter ones to start things if you want to encourage them, or let them be last because that gives them confidence, whatever works best for you. I think the other thing that's been useful to me, and I think this feels like old school, horrible, semi-quanti qual, but it is actually quite a neat way of finding out where people sit on an issue without them having to wait their turn to speak, which is ask them before the session to print off numbers 1 to 5 or smiley faces from grimace to laugh, and then ask them, as soon as you've asked a question or exposed a piece of stimulus material, just to hold up their initial response. It's sometimes easier than them scribbling things down and then reading them back. They don't really get a chance to change their minds, and actually you get quite a nice picture of everybody's response and where the weight of interest in something might lie. So those sorts of things we would usually dismiss as slightly ham-fisted are often quite useful, I think, when we're doing things online. There's a couple of other things. It's much easier to bond 4 or 5 people than it is to bond 7 or 8. So yeah. I've always been a fan of smaller groups anyway. I think they make for the best types of insights, but I would certainly recommend you try and keep groups smaller if you're using online research. I can see a question pop up. Is that the same for children? Yes, depending on their age. I think children are, little children I don't have experience with online. I know what they're like online. They're very confident with their friends. I have no idea how they perform in a group, and we did talk about this a bit before we started. But for older children and teenagers, I still think smaller sessions are possibly slightly better at getting them to stay with you for any length of time. So that's what I would recommend, but I'm really interested to hear what everybody else thinks. The only other thing I wanted to say is about stimulus material, and then we can move on, which is send stimulus material ahead of time if you can, and ask people to open an envelope and reveal it all at the same time. Because as soon as you screen share, particularly if you put it on full screen, you really lose a sense of how the group are working together. You can have a limited number of faces on the screen. They're tiny. You're looking at the material with them, but you're not really seeing what their visceral response to stuff is. And it's really nice if they've got it in front of them for them to start pointing out to you where they have interest, and that seems to be really quite neat. And if it's not confidential, send it ahead and ask them to read through stuff and make some notes on the types of responses they want to share with you, and explain to the client that this might not be the normal way you'd expose material, but it's actually equally valid in a different context, because there is no magic answer to how you reveal this material. You just need to make it work for your setup, I guess, and that's been my experience anyway.
Yeah, I think what I'd add to your points there, Judy, is just that there's real art to trying to break up your 90-minute session and peppering it with tasks and things that sort of break up and make the sort of time pass in a sort of different way, and even getting people to stand up or move around. I think the other thing is around, we discussed before, around as soon as somebody clicks away from the platform to an internet window or something else, sometimes that's sort of temptation to check your emails or look at something else or zone out does occur. So I love the suggestion there of posting people something and then let's all open it together in the group and have the big reveal. I think that injects a little something nice into it, and I think creative solutions like that are fantastic. So yeah, and
that's where I think a table and being a bit further back, so if I'm here you can see more of my body language than if I'm here, and my wrinkles, but I think that's quite an interesting technique, because you can start to watch people's actual physical response to things in a way that you can do so easily in groups, and you just can't do as easily online. So that's the sort of stuff I'm thinking about.
And with body language, you can also see if people are getting tired or losing interest or need a bit of a break, and that's when you can sort of put an impromptu break to go and get a drink or go and get a snack, give them a bit of a time sort of like limit, I guess, in doing that, but make it a real positive action and something that we're all doing at the same time and we're all in it together.
Exactly, and I think that's really important. Just say to them, this is weird, isn't it? I'm looking at, which pair of glasses to wear. You might be looking at whether your hair looks right. Don't worry about any of that stuff. Just feel very natural. People that are online all the time are not going to give a monkeys. They're going to be absolutely fine. And we've also got to remember there will be people out there for whom this is more natural than sitting in a room. And the other thing is not to treat everybody as though they're hopeless. Just because it's new to some people, it won't be at all new to others, and I think we also have to sort of respect that this is their more natural environment in some ways.
We just had a question through on what's your view on the ideal session length on average, and I'm interested in other people's views, but we've been running quite a lot of 90-minute sessions, but broken up with tasks and chaptered into sort of 5 or 6 sort of chapters and quite sort of carefully structured, and we found that's worked pretty well. Again, it's something that you have to judge based on topic, audience, etc. Than what other people think.
I'd agree with that, and I've been part of a 4-hour workshop, and it was awful. It wasn't the fault of anybody. It was just terrible. It was too long. Everyone was exhausted. You actually got numb sitting down for so long, mentally and physically, and everybody tired out after about 2 hours. So I'd agree, Simon. I think 90 minutes is ideal. 2 hours max if you can give people a break. And I know in the AQR board meetings we've done exactly that. We've had a 2-hour session. We've had a good 5 to 10 minute break in the middle, which has been really important. And I think that's works really well.
We've got a very interesting long question, which we might read whilst... Lauren, do you want to go through your next point whilst we read this long question?
Well, my points are covered off, actually, Simon. Mine was around sort of like timing and building in breaks and things like that, and the length of the session. So actually, they've been covered.
that's probably my fault. I'm very sorry, Lauren. I might have nicked your last point. Sorry about that.
It's fine. They're all intertwined, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing we discussed last week on the other webinar, the AQR webinar about building empathy, was just around, I suppose, using humour, which extends some of the points Judy and Lauren have made, and I suppose acknowledging the situation and making light of it, and injecting that humour if things don't work. It's technology. That's the way these things sort of roll sometimes. So.
I've just got a question about incentives, and I don't know what your thoughts on this are. I have had a really overwhelming response to incentives, which is whatever you want to pay, just pay it to a charity and I'll sign a piece of paper for it. That's the first thing that I think's been really interesting, and people not caring as much what the incentive is, partly because I think they're happy to be part of something, and also because they don't feel comfortable necessarily taking the money. But we've kept the incentives much the same. Just not petrol contributions if that's been an issue, or transport costs. So I don't know what anyone else has been doing.
Yeah, same, very, very, very similar, to be honest. I think I think we've got to bear in mind, particularly now, it might be different when we do come out of this, but I think people are, but they might not be travelling, but they are spending a lot of time on screens just generally. So it's not as if just staying at home is a luxury time saver for them. Actually, if anything, it might be a bit harder to actually get them actually on the screen, on an evening or in the day as well. So just bear that in mind. And
I think Julie is saying, are clients expecting reduced costs? I can't see the whole of that question. I don't know if anyone else can.
Yeah.
Are they expecting reduced costs for online groups?
Yeah, I think for me, this is, everybody's got to run their own businesses, but I think this is part of a broader discussion you'd be having with your clients. You're writing a proposal, you're talking to your client about what that proposal is going to deliver, and that's part of a broader discussion, I would say. And I think certainly I would be very wary of just sort of seeing an online version of qualitative research as something that is just a cheap and dirty alternative. It's not at all that, and the amount of craft, thought, analysis and hard work that goes into it is comparable to face-to-face. It's just that we're kind of running things online. So I would think very carefully about your pricing, and that as part of a broader conversation with clients. There's a couple of questions. One of them was on how do you get people to kind of make sure that they're not in a noisy room? So how do you handle interruptions from other household members, noise in the background, etc.? I think this links to the point that Lauren said in terms of this sort of joining instructions set up, how they're recruited. And I think particularly for some of our younger participants who've taken part, perhaps we didn't make it because they're used to engaging online, digital natives or whatever we want to call it. They might expect that it's okay just to be on their phone, headphones on, whilst the TV's on, and all the rest of it. I think that's absolutely not the case. It's part about briefing and very clear instructions and recruitment, and part of it is about asking the question: do you have a quiet space between the hours of X and Y when this group goes by? I think we do have to acknowledge the fact that not everybody lives in a 15-bedroom mansion with a huge garden and lots of space. So we need to manage expectations. Exactly.
I've seen another question about a couple that, one for you later, Simon, which is which version of Zoom do you recommend using? What's your advice when stimulus is confidential? Best way to share or show? If it's absolutely confidential, just like you would in a viewing facility group, you'd hold it up, share your screen. It will be recorded if you're recording the session, which you tend to do, and then you just take it away. So the only person with the recording is you and the people there. But actually, in all the work I've done, with the exception of one piece of stimulus, everything has been able to be sent ahead. So I guess you just have to play that by ear. And another question, which is sort of linked, which is about the analysis. Any differences with online that we need to consider? I think if you walk through the recording, I've found the analysis pretty similar. I think you're looking for really juicy quotes or talking heads. Sometimes I've asked people if we can take edits of the video recording to use as part of a presentation back to clients. They seem to be really happy with that. I think because the client's coming along with you and feels very much more in the room, sometimes the analysis process is more shared with them as well, which is quite nice. And they're often making, in the work I've been doing through this crisis, they've been making decisions very quickly. They've often been related to their behaviour through coronavirus. So they've been sometimes slightly more tactical pieces, and actually they're making decisions almost at the end of the process. So the analysis is slightly different sometimes in that respect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's a raft of questions coming in on the chat line. Julia was explaining that she raised a cost issue because of your Aura session earlier this week, where the typical view from some senior clients is Qual Online is such a compromise. You may or may not want to answer that one. Question about best online platforms, and I think AQR is running a whole load of road shows, and I think it's probably best to make up your own mind about that from some of what's out there. But you may. Do
you want me to run through? I had some signposting stuff on platforms. Do you want me to run through that briefly now?
I just quickly answer that question on compromise. I think it's different. I don't think it's always a compromise. It depends what you're trying to do. If you're trying to run an ethnographic piece where you want to be in people's homes, sitting next to them, looking at them, you know, having a much more multi-sensory experience, yes, it will be a compromise. But in most cases, it's just different. And the way we gear these sessions up has to reflect the difference in the context, and nothing more than that, really. I think you can get great work out of online groups. It's just doing it slightly differently. Sorry, Simon.
So I was going to, I did design an absolutely beautiful slide, which Luella denied me showing. You know, I spent ages crafting it, beautiful kerning and pagination, so I'm rather disappointed we can't show it.
I'll cut you all off and I'll try and do it.
Oh, well, we could yeah. Anyway, so I was just going to mention, in terms of platforms, so people obviously familiar with Zoom from a consumer perspective, maybe Microsoft Teams from a kind of B2B kind of organizational perspective. I think obviously kind of familiarity, easy to use, makes them kind of strong contenders. Some alternatives to consider that you might want to Google. So there's a platform called Interview, which is INTERVU, similar to Zoom, but designed for research, really kind of majors on the stimulus presentation here, built-in polls and that type of stuff, and it's quite interactive. So that's one to Google to have a look at and consider. A second one is Miro, which is MIRO. Again, that's more about taking workshops online, so really majors on an online whiteboard there that allows you to kind of sort of move images around, a bit of drag and drop functionality, really focusing more on the kind of group innovation, creative testing, co-creation element. And similarly, Mural, which is MURAL. Again, that's focusing on workshops, ideation and co-creation. It's more asynchronous. It's strengths more suited to asynchronous sort of research tasks. Again, drag and drop interface, focusing on innovation, etc. The other thing I'd say is one thing we've used within platforms, so within Zoom or Teams or whatever else, are building in the bolt-on tools for tasks. So you may have used or heard of Mentimeter before, which is just allowing people to, I suppose, provide an unbiased written feedback within that kind of group session as part of your tasking. So polls, tasks, verbatim capture, really simple setup, really simple to use as well. And people can do that on their mobile or in a separate internet window whilst they're kind of in a group setting. And similarly, similar to Mentimeter is Quandar, which is QUANDR, very similar to Mentimeter, and again, it's got functionality in mood boards, etc. So what I guess I'm not here to kind of give an in-depth pros and cons, but just Google some different tools and consider that. And I think that links to a question that Chloe said in terms of once we're out of this sort of slightly unusual period into kind of the new normal, do we have to professionalize some of the platforms that we use and not rely on just free Zoom accounts and stuff? And I think that's a really, really good question to do. I think to consider. I think one thing I would say is that my own views have changed partly through just having to kind of use these platforms far more. I previously viewed, I suppose, online focus groups as a supplement rather than a substitute. I think I'm reconsidering my view now. I think it's part of the toolkit. I think it's part of the blend. And certainly with some of the clients we work with and some of the geographies, there's a lot of people who would love to come to a group discussion who live in the north of Scotland, for example, who might not be able to do so. So I think it's really interesting to think where we're going to be like 6, 12, 18 months time, and how we're going to use part of these tools in our tool. So interested to hear other people's experiences as well.
And somebody just asked what the bolt-on was called. I think Mincemeter is the one you were talking about, wasn't it?
Yeah, Mentimeter. So I think it's MENTI Mentimeter. I'll check that one out. I think it's you set it up. Your session would have like a simple like 6-digit code, and then you preload questions, polls, that type of stuff. We found that really good, and the moderator controls that. And I think found it really good to inject some tasking within groups, polls, that type of stuff.
Yeah. There's a couple more questions on here. Any thoughts on the best time of day to run online groups? I think the morning works better than the evening. In my experience, people are knackered by the evening. They've spoken to quite a lot of other people. They've probably cracked open their bottle of wine or their beer. We're used to locking down earlier or being in the garden if the weather's nice. And or exercising. A lot of people choose to exercise between sort of 5 and 8. So I think the morning's better. I think people are more up for it in the morning. But I don't know. What do you think, Lauren?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It's the same rule of thumb, isn't it, for face-to-face groups? I think we'd all love to do them in the morning if we could, but unfortunately, that's not when people are available. But I think, there might be a bit more flexibility now, given what's going on. To be honest, I think all the same rules apply, depending on the age group you're talking to.
There's a really good point from Matt Hogan here, which is bandwidth is better in non-peak times. You're absolutely right. Starting something at 10:30 or 11 is much better than starting it at 9. And also starting meetings 20 past the hour seems to make a big difference to starting them at 30:30. I've found. So silly things like that.
Interesting. Yeah, I know that there's a platform. So we are platform agnostic as an organisation. So I'm not endorsing any platform. It's there for people to go out and decide themselves. We do have a couple more platform road shows that are taking place over the next couple of weeks for Discuss.io and Visions Live. And I know Mike Stevens' website, insightplatforms.com, has every single conceivable market research, qualitative research, customer experience platform available, reviewed in detail. And I'm sure Mike would appreciate a shout out there to go and have a look. And it's a great piece of work that he's done there.
I've got a probably totally irrelevant question, but I'm really interested as a journalist. I like looking in people's eyes, and I find it very difficult with Zoom to know where to position the camera so that I can actually look as though I'm looking in people's eyes. And I just wondered whether that came into groups or into Zoom sessions that you've done or meetings.
I think I know exactly what you mean because I'm looking down at my laptop with a slightly sore neck, and I have to do yoga later on. I try and actually stand up for a lot of my video calls, and I like to move around a bit, but that's my own personal preference. I was doing a presentation yesterday, and I had my A4 pad, and I was projecting and walking around the room very, very manfully. It was a joy to behold. But yeah, it's better just like crowded ever. But everybody's very different.
Right. Have we covered everything to everybody's satisfaction, please, people?
I can see one other question from Abby Alcock, who says she was interested to know about people talking over and interrupting each other, and how have we got any hints and tips on that? I think you will always have the opportunity to encourage people to do it if they're very quiet. And just as you would in a group with a dominant respondent, you need to pull somebody back if they're going on for too long or they're always starting. So, you just literally say, can we have something from our other people first? Exactly as you would do in a normal room. That's my view of it. Sometimes it's quite nice to let people interrupt each other. It shows you where people feel passionate about ideas. So, you have to again play it by ear.
There's somebody's asking there where to find a comparison of all the platforms. So it's insightplatforms.com. I'm sure we can send a link out.
Yeah.
But that's basically got every possible. I think there's 800 platforms on there. Enough for 3 years worth of exploration, more than one a day.
I will try and do that at the. Ooh, would you recommend Zoom Pro instead of the free version?
I use Zoom Pro because you last longer and can share more and do more. And I worry about people being on for more than an hour and whether meetings just suddenly close down. And I think therefore it's better. It's not a particularly expensive upgrade. So that's what I've done, but I don't know. I think a lot of people don't want, I mean, I've got 2 clients who won't use Zoom anyway, because they think its security's compromised. Personally, I don't think it is. I think it was a while back, but I think it's cleared that up. But Teams seems to be the client's preference for certainly online meetings.
But it seems to be a bit unwieldy.
Teams, I thought so at first, but I think that was more me.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure, but I think it's all right.
All right. Well, thank you, one and all. Just to echo Chloe's statement that we have been running platforms and there are more coming up, so keep an eye on AQR's website. And also there are a list of events coming up, including a quiz which has just come out today. So yeah, go to www.aqr.org.uk and have a look. And thank you all 3 of you very much. I'm pleased that everybody got on after I deleted it on Friday. So thank you for persevering and coming back again. Yeah, and goodbye. And we'll put this up on the website as well. So thank you one and all, and farewell.
Bye.
Bye.
Double thumbs up. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.